Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today our guest is Mr. Jim McMurtry. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you, Payman.
I guess we'll go on a first name basis. Jim, you can call me Payman. Jim, can you, for the benefit of the audience, can you tell us a little about who you are and what happened to you that sort of made you quasi-famous in Canada?
Well, I'm delighted to be called quasi-famous. I've been called a lot worse than that. And whether I'm famous or not, I'm hoping that I'm doing the right thing. And I do know people have taken notice, and I've got a good following on Twitter, including some journalists. So I think I'm saying things that resonate, but that wasn't my intention. So for a long time, I was a teacher. I got fired essentially 3 years ago, but it wasn't officially till a year ago. But I haven't taught for 3 years. And what I did wrong was question what students were saying in my classroom on May 31st, 2021, which was that Christian teachers at residential schools tortured and murdered their students. And all I said at the time was, is my understanding as someone who has high academic qualifications and a lot of publications and a lot of experience in the teaching world, and have met people who both taught and attended residential schools. I said that my understanding that those who enrolled in residential schools that died did so tragically from disease. That was enough to get me tossed. And since then, I've become an advocate for other teachers in the school system who can't speak up, who are concerned about 6 things in particular, and it relates to gender indoctrination, race indoctrination, indigenization, lowering standards, particularly behavioral standards for students, but also lowered academic standards, censorship of literature, and falsification of history.
Okay, that's a lot of topics to cover. Why don't we start right at the beginning? Assume that the audience doesn't know what a residential school is. Can you tell us, like, what were these things?
Yeah, well, in the west and north of Canada, 150 years ago, when the first residential school became officially established, but there have been schools for Indigenous or Native children since 1620. So the idea was to provide kids with schooling. Many chiefs saw that as a right, as a treaty right, and obviously many Indigenous parents wanted that for their children. But in the north and west of Canada, it was hard to provide day schools for people who are living in remote areas. And some bands were very small and nomadic. And so the biggest problem for many is that the students were shipped away from home to go to school. But that was only about a third of First Nation kids, which means 1/6 of all Indigenous meaning First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. So many more did not attend a residential school. So the kids went there and they were educated. There is a trope that's developed that these schools were very much chambers of horror, and terrible things happened to kids with physically, sexually, and it was just so traumatizing that the Canadian government has paid billions of dollars in reparations, and many people think that that's still far from enough. But there's another side to the residential schools. Another side is that in many cases, the parents applied to have their children there. And then over time, they became a refuge for children who were escaping abusive home family situations on the reserve, and many orphans. So the schools did have a positive side to them. They had, their intentions were wholly positive, which is to give Indigenous kids a leg up in life and help them adapt to modern society. That today is now described as cultural genocide, which is, in my view, complete nonsense. I think it's cultural empowerment for people to come to the Western world to learn one of the lead languages, whether it's English or French, and to have the skills, the literacy, the numeracy, and other skills that is going to help them be successful in life. So to me, it's empowerment.
We're drifting towards the big issue that I do want to talk about, which is Marxism in schools. But before we get there, these schools, these residential schools, what were they? Like, who funded them? Were they public institutions, or were just Christian missionaries setting them up on their own?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So it was government done. So the government entered into treaties with indigenous groupings across the west and north of Canada, and in the late 19th century. And in doing so, one of the things that was talked about is the children had, their children had a right to go to school. So it was negotiated with indigenous leaders. So there's nothing controversial about that. No, some people might say so, but that's nonsense. But who is going to work these schools? Where are they going to find teachers to go into remote northern communities and teach? Well, there's one group of Canadians, like in every other part of the world, who are particularly charitable, and that's the Christian missionaries. And so many of the teachers in these schools weren't even Canadian. Many of them came from abroad, from places in Europe, and their purpose, their higher calling, was to devote themselves to raising up the neediest groups in our world. And so it was done in many cases as an act of charity by the church. There was not a lot of money involved, and so this idea that we should bear false witness against the church and all the teachers that were drawn from the church, I think, is unfair, because they were willing to do something that nobody else was willing to do, which was to educate kids, and again, who were in far-flung areas. And it was just, imagine how hard it was just to live in these areas 150 years ago.
I guess the next question I have is, what was this? What was the accusation of the mass graves in Kamloops?
I'm laughing, and I'm not meaning to be laughing, other than that's the issue that got me, of course, canned. And thank you for allowing me to indicate what it is a little bit more clearly. So in late May 2021, there was a young archaeologist who discovered what she calls anomalies, so some sort of disturbance in the ground. And she'd been hearing stories from an elder or two in the community of Kamloops, which is, and by the way, this reserve is, it's interesting to note that the residential school is in the center of the reserve, and the reserve itself is in the center of the city of Kamloops. So we're not talking about somewhere where terrible things would happen and nobody would hear about it. It was right in the community, and parents certainly would have had an idea, and there were indigenous staff at the school. But she came up with this idea that 215 disturbances in the ground must be dead children who were murdered by their teachers. And the term mass grave, we don't know if she used that because we can't see a report. So the moment her report went out, the band in Kamloops, they have sealed the report. Nobody in the public can look at it. And the reports went around the world of a mass grave, and mass grave, of course, is sinister, where people have been murdered and secretly buried. And so I was caught in that because I was teaching Calculus 12 at the time, and the principal at the school said, all teachers, we have to talk about this horrible, shocking case of 215 child remains being discovered in a mass grave in Kamloops. And again, all I said was, my understanding is those that did die, and only 51 died in Kamloops ever, in the almost 100-year history of the school, they did so mostly from disease, some cases accidents and fires. So the whole thing was not a hoax in the sense that nobody intended to do it, but it was as far-fetched as anything you could imagine. But there seemed to be an appetite in Canada. This was shortly after the George Floyd incident in the U.S., where this idea that white Christian society was terrible, and treats its minorities. And Canada was looking to have its own George Floyd moment. And all of a sudden, look, as we've been saying, Trudeau certainly wants to get on his white horse and play savior to the least fortunate groups in our society and pretend he's better than all other prime ministers because of what he's done or will do for them. He's the ultimate virtue signaler, and he jumped on this, and all sorts of people did, and said, look how terrible we are. And it just proves our thesis, which is that we live in a systemically racist society and our ancestors were monsters. The truth is very different. And it's personal for me, Payman, because there are 4 missionaries, Christian missionaries in my family, including 2 great uncles who gave their lives over to helping people and adapt to the Western world. And this idea that they were bad people is just so counter to any evidence of them. They were wonderful, wonderful men. And so to describe Christian missionaries or teachers as murderers without a speck of evidence, I think is absolutely atrocious. And then, as your viewers may know, on October 27th, 2022, all members of Parliament in the House of Commons that day voted in support of a resolution, a motion saying that Canada was a genocidal state. And that all came out of this false discovery. There's been no discovery. They haven't even dug. They will never dug. The police haven't investigated. And they won't dig because they know there are no bodies there. And if they found any bodies, how would they ever imagine ahead of time that they'd be young children? Like, how do you do that when you find there's a rock or a root in the ground or an old farm, piece of farm equipment? How do you know that all of a sudden it's a child who was murdered by a priest or nun at the school?
So I got 2 questions for that. Let's go with the first one. What is going on in society? I know you're not a psychologist, but like you mentioned George Floyd. Like how do we just get whipped up into a frenzy? I was born in Iran. Iran it's a horrible country. Great people, horrible country. But like if the government went to the people and said Iranians are bad people, there'd be another revolution. Well, how is it that we just accept this here in Canada and in the West?
Well, it's a good question. If I'm allow me to quickly note that there are many Iranian women in particular are my heroes, people like Shirin Ebadi. I think the Iranian people are incredibly heroic what the young women are doing right now and taking off their forced hijabs and stuff. And I think we're very much bonded, man, in the things that we're looking for, which is about rights and freedoms and having everybody enjoy the quality of life that the 2 of us seem to be enjoying now. So how does this happen? How do we become susceptible to a mass hysteria? That's a great question. And I may not be a psychologist, but I do have, I do have an opinion on that. And I think it's shared by many. And that is that long ago, Canadians became seduced by the idea that groups in our society that aren't doing as well because we, the more favored ones, the more successful ones, are responsible for that. And that's the white man's burden, Western people's burden of that we must do more to raise our fellow man, that we in the West be more successful, particularly in the British Empire long ago, and ties in the ideas of Kipling and others. So I think the intentions were good. It was to say, what could we do? And that's why there's so many Christian missionaries in the world today. The idea that we must give of ourselves to have others enjoy the fruits of our society. But what it's morphed into, that early political correctness or postmodernism or Christian ethos, whatever one wants to call it, or just simply, it's in all religions, this sense of charity. It's become something that's really ugly and authoritarian and Marxist, to use your word earlier. What they're focused on right now is the answer to 21st societal problems isn't to protect the environment better. It really isn't, or to stop war, or to find an answer to disease. It's really about leveling groups. It's this idea that there's something wrong with Canada because Asian kids do better or white kids do better than Black or Indigenous kids in school. So all of a sudden we have to change everything around. Of course, just rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, because you're not making society better. You're just simply saying, well, these people are oppressors and victimizers and horrible people, and these other people are victims, and they're all of a sudden we understand ourselves better, and let's go forward. George Floyd was a perfect example. The guy was a lifelong criminal who did, among other things, beat up a pregnant woman, punching her in the stomach, and all of a sudden there's statues being erected to remember him. And then we have statues to the man who created Canada, one of the best countries in the world. And if somebody wants to tell me it's not one of the best countries in the world, please do. They're going to get a mouthful in return, because they're just wouldn't be making any sense. We have so many immigrants wanting to come here, migrants, because this is a great country, because people are free and they have rights and then good health care and education and rule of law and all these things, and we should be proud of it. But any statute of people like Egerton Ryerson, who started free universal schooling in Canada, or particularly Sir John Macdonald, who began Canada in 1867 more than any other person, and many others like John Henry Dundas in Toronto. It's just absolutely ridiculous that we're destroying our statues while putting up statues to people who are nihilists, who just want to destroy society and destroy all wealth creation, so they can direct more privileges and advantages to the people who, in my view, in many cases are the least worthy. I think the only way you can create a just society is for people to be free enough to find their own rewards in life. And I'm not any crazy right-wing capitalist or what people want to label me. I just believe in Canada as it's always been, which is we need to have equality of opportunity. We need to have fair play and lots of other notions that justice and so forth that fit in with the world the society that we built. And now we have people coming to the fore who are wanting to strip that down and create an unlevel playing field. And I just find it absolutely horrible. And then I look coming back to Iran, this idea that women are treated differently than men. It's the women that have to wear these awful outfits. Well, that's not the Canada I know, and I'd fight just as hard for the rights of an Indigenous person or a Black person as I would, if not harder, than I would for the rights of someone who looks like me. I believe fundamentally in the human and individual dignity.
You have so many good topics. It's almost hard for me to stay focused. But let's go back to one thing you said about the declared these mass graves of genocide in the Parliament. Try to put yourself in the mindset of the official opposition, like the Conservative Party. I'm not even touching the NDP or the Liberals. How could they come up? How do you vote for this? Do you think they were coerced into it? Were they just like, oh, I'll be crucified and I won't win my election back? Like, how could you do that to your own country?
You said it. They're just thinking people are guided by self-interest. When I was in grade 9 in high school, everyone was wearing the same type of boots and bell-bottom jeans and the same type of checkered shirt. I did the same thing. I wasn't strong enough to go against the flow. I wasn't smart enough either to I just assumed that that's what, if others were doing it, I should do it as well. And that's what politicians are doing. I don't think my father was a politician. I'm very proud of my father because I don't think he fits this description, but I think most politicians are followers. They're not leaders. They get in, they get all these perks and they go, how do I stay in the game? And they do it by waiting until a majority of Canadians are on one side or another of an issue. And then they go, oh, that's where I am. And so they duck from issues for as long as they can. And I think in the last 3 years, the Conservative Party has been ducking from this issue. I'm sure many Conservative politicians, some of whom I've talked to privately, are just as skeptical as I am about everything that comes out of the woke mouth of someone like Trudeau. But they're very careful. They don't want to be unelected so that's it. I think people are just doing whatever's easier, and I think I think that's true of people living in dictatorship. That it's not that they want to live in dictatorship, but it's easier for them to go with the flow.
How do you think the media fits into all of this? Like right now, they've got Pierre Poilievre between a rock and a hard place. Like if he drifts too far to the right, they'll call him a Nazi or a fascist. If he drifts too far to the left to pick up leftist voters, he hemorrhages his base. Like, what do you think the media's role is?
Well, I think the media, I think the media is made up of individuals who are looking in the mirror and going, what's going to make me get promoted or have more money or have more power, influence, whatever. And I think whatever it is that comes through society, when I just use, I get an example of it just as a school teacher. There was a time when I was in school, everybody was going out and buying rocks, and we were calling them our pet rocks. So stores were selling rocks to kids. And as silly as that sounds, that's mass hysteria. It's just people wanting to fit in and wanting to do what others are doing. I think individuals in the media, I think many of them live unexamined lives. I think they don't think outside of the box. They're incapable of it. I'm not incapable mentally. They're just incapable because of the way they're being formed. They want us to be successful. Why would they go against the group thing? And reading Orwell is the best way, I think, to exercise one's understanding of this, is that the moment that one goes against the group, then one is stepping, moving towards one's own self-destruction in one form or another. So I don't think it's complex. I think conservative politicians are quietly going, okay, a lot of what is being said I don't really agree with, but I'm not going to open my mouth and compromise in any way my re-election chances. And the media are no different. The media want to sell newspapers, and they don't want to get in trouble. And there's woke virus has taken over the judiciary. So everyone's afraid. And what makes me a little different, if I may say this one thing, is that I'm not afraid. My employer, my union, my regulatory body, my government, for 3 years, everyone has tried to threaten me. And recently, when it's been pretty obvious that I was right entirely, that were no mass or unmarked graves, there was no murder, there was not even bad treatment in most cases. These schools were fine educational establishments when judged within their time and context. But and recently people tried to bribe me with offering me money to go away. But I'm not taking either. I am somebody who's committed to the idea that you don't lie to other people, in particular to school kids, about history, about anything. I was in trouble starting 6 years ago for saying there's such a thing as boys and girls. And I know it's become a bigger issue today, but teachers are afraid to say something as fundamental, I think, as boys and girls, and soon it will be 2 + 2 is 4 will be questioned. I think that's the nature of dictatorship. And this is it. There are people who are controlling us. And Canada is founded on these, and this is connection to my father. He had a lead role in bringing and patriating the Constitution in 1982, and he was a guy who stood out. And when he passed a few weeks ago, they lowered the flags in Ontario's government, in the Legislative Assembly in Ontario, Queen's Park, in memory of my father. He stood for rights and freedoms. I was the proudest son, because that's what guides me. It's all about rights and freedoms and truth and decency and beauty and all the things that used to guide us. And now it's something other than that. How can people go around saying that 215 children were murdered in just one school and as many as 25,000 in all the schools when there's no evidence? Like how do people, how does anyone in the media and the government and in educational institutions, how does anyone who's equipped with this brain just like mine and yours, and many of you a lot smarter than I am, how can they compromise themselves morally to that extent?
I definitely don't have an answer to that question. Hopefully, we'll get to one by the end of the episode. But let's go the charter and then the judiciary. What are your views on the charter, 1982? How did it change things, and how has it led to? I'm calling it judicial activism, but what you the critique you had of the judges earlier?
Well, I think it's very much from your view and based on what you just said to me. And it sounds like you know a lot more than I do on this. All I can say is the charter was, they're very fundamental principles on liberty and so forth. And yet, to get a deal, I guess they brought in Section 15, Section 35, and anyhow, they brought in certain sections that repudiate everything that's in those initial subsections, and so it's or sections, and so it's sad. It's very sad for me. The intention with affirmative action was not to bring about an activist judiciary. It wasn't to read between the lines and absolutely, if it says there should be equality or there shouldn't be discrimination on the basis of race or religion or gender or whatever, they meant it. And now what we're seeing in Canada is they're trying to find the exception in every rule in the Constitution. So I think I think very sadly, and not the Constitution, the Charter, I think the Charter has become an embarrassment. But I don't think it's the wording of the Charter that's the problem. I think it's the woke virus that has captured the judiciary. And I think we need to get rid of all judges who are not interpreting the laws as it is meant to be interpreted.
So the woke mind virus. Can you define? You can take time. I'm putting you on the spot, but can you define what Marxism is, and then let's go from there.
Okay, again, I have a feeling that you're a lot smarter and more knowledgeable than I am in this, but I certainly know a lot myself, and I had a lot of exposure to it because I had an uncle who self-styled himself a Marxist, and a wonderful man, very bright man. But I didn't understand why he had ideas that were just so ugly. And so Marxism to me is, it's many things, but it's this idea that the answer comes from revolution. And I think what we're seeing with wokeism, with these progressive ideas, is they really are looking for a dismantling, a decolonization, a deconstructionism of society. So if that's not revolutionary, then well, I think it is. And I think any sensible person would say that they really want to fundamentally alter Canadian society. But in doing that, they're obviously risking everything that we have that's good in our lives. So Marxism to me is first and foremost the idea of a revolution. And secondly, it's this idea of forced equality. And as we saw in Russia, if you have to kill all the wealthy farmers, whom we call the kulaks today, and in order to make all the farmers equal, then people will do that, and that was done, and it was just an absolutely horrible thing. So I think Marxism is completely discredited, and the idea of equality isn't going to come about with a government imposing that upon people. I think it will only be achieved if it's something that preserves people's rights and freedoms and ambitions and desires in life.
So, Jim, my question to you is, how many years were you an educator? And both as an educator and as a student growing up in Canada, how have you seen the education system change?
Well, I thank you for asking that. So I was a teacher for over 40 years. I was a principal for some of that time and a college lecturer. I did a PhD at the University of Toronto. I've done a range of things in the area of education. And so I feel I have a little bit of a little bit of authority in speaking. And I would say overall, schools are better than they were. because what we're doing in schools, which we weren't doing as well, is we're focusing more on individual kids. And there's a whole armada or army of people in schools to help kids. Oh, if a kid didn't bring his lunch, then someone's going to run and get lunch for the kid. There's something the kid needs in aspirin, someone's going to deal with that. Anyhow, there's just so much attention to kids, and I'm for that. I really believe that schools should be a happy place, particularly in the younger age, for all children. We're all different, and children's individual needs should be attended to. So that's all a good thing. What's going wrong in doing that? We were not meant to give up our academic values. That children also have a basic need to grow intellectually and academically. They have to learn to be resilient. They have to learn to be adaptable, to have skills, to get a job one day and to keep themselves in it. So those things are being diminished as we've gone so overboard toward, oh, Johnny, your feelings are hurt. Therefore, let's get rid of the literature that we're reading. And recently it was To Kill a Mockingbird, where I live in Surrey. Getting rid of the most popular book ever in North American history, in my view, for school children, because somebody objects to just something in the book or was bothered by something. So to me, overall, schools are not a bad place, and I don't want to ever come across as someone who doesn't believe in education, and particularly public education. But what's gone wrong right now is, again, there's assault, as I said, on academic values. And one of the academic values is independent thinking. It's free expression. It's the ability to have a debate in classroom. So once I lost my job for saying something that was historically accurate, but upset my woke leadership that wants to lie to kids about the past and pretend that all white Christians are evil people with regard to residential schooling, that I noticed that they were digging up other allegations against me because they didn't have a very good case. And the pattern there was that they were just trying to find things that I did that were out of line with their thinking. And it was quite extraordinary. And one of the allegations against me is that I didn't respect COVID rules, the COVID restrictions. Well, I did. I certainly did. I believed in what our government was telling us, but not entirely. I think most Canadians thought, okay, there's some dumb things happening here when people are losing their jobs or having their bank accounts frozen or whatever over not following what the government's saying. But as a teacher, they closed off all the water fountains in the schools they weren't allowing access to water for kids. They're closing the playgrounds. Even if it was a single kid, you're there with a single kid, in my case with grandchild, you couldn't go in a park anyhow. So that's what schools are doing wrong. They're doing a lot to address the needs of children, but they're completely repudiating the basic needs of children in an intellectual and academic sense. They need to think, to develop their thinking. They need to be questioned, tested. They need to debate. They need to be able to all these things. And yet if you do that in a classroom, you say, okay, residential schools, boys and girls, or transsexuals, or puberty blockers for 8-year-olds, or putting everybody in race boxes and saying white kids are all privileged and all black kids or brown kids are victims. Let's have a discussion about that. Let's look at this from various sides, because the entire truth is, it requires a number of different perspectives and lenses and evaluations. You do that as a teacher and you're done. There's so many subjects in school right now where you have to say one thing and that's it. And kids, shut your mouth. We're not here to have a discussion. And I think that's just absolutely appalling. And when you talk about, use the word Marxism to begin this, there is Marxism. Their kids are getting scholarships and getting entry into academic programs in university and getting all sorts of advantages simply on the basis of race. And that's what Marxism does. It reduces people to race. You're either, proletariat, or you're part of the ruling, oppressing elite, as a pig dog capitalist. It's just stupid categories that they put everybody into. And that's what they're doing in schools with people. And I don't even mind that. If someone says, okay, well, yeah, you learn in your other class, there's no such thing as boys and girls. Okay, fine, let's talk about that. Your teacher might say that, your other teacher, but all plants are male and female. So species are. So why would you think that's not true? Anyhow, I don't have a problem with views that are dumb. I don't have views that are unscientific. I don't have the views because maybe some of my own views are that way. But what we do to get to where we are as a civilization is we bring all ideas into the light, and then science does its job and discards the ideas that are bad or no longer valid, and it brings in new ones. And that's what schools should do. And then you have people like Trudeau talking about follow the science with COVID, and then he goes to a grave in Saskatchewan with a teddy bear that he's bought and puts his knee down and fake cries and talks about all the kids that were murdered in residential schools. Well, if you follow the science there, Trudeau, you know that you were on a Catholic grave that was mostly adults, so it were from all different races, and all the graves were marked, and nobody's contesting anything about that graveyard. In other words, it's just we need to question people. That's the most fundamental right of a child, the right to know, and a child can't know anything if the child is not allowed to critically assess what he or she is knowing.
Let's explain to me how a school functions. So, is the school a crown corporation, or is it a private corporation that's just subcontracted to by the government?
Yeah, well, it's fully government owned. It's taxpayer paid, as you know. And what happens is in Canada, the provinces take care of schools. It's not a federal responsibility. And then the provinces, what they do, the education ministers, which don't employ a lot of people, surprisingly, very few people. So they give money to all the different school districts or school boards, depending on what province one's in, district or board. So I'll call them school boards because that's a more common term in Canada. So they give money to the school board and they say, here, this is what you run your schools. So I think there's a tremendous amount of power that goes out to individual school boards. They're the ones in British Columbia, for example, who determine what textbooks, what novels are read in schools. And so they have a lot of power. But they are certainly come under on the aegis of the provincial government. The provincial government, sets basic parameters and principles and so forth. And what they've done in the area of indigenization, which is now one of the latest mania. There's always fads coming through school. There was a time they knocked down all the classroom walls when I was a student teacher 40 plus years ago, and they thought that was a good idea so we wouldn't be in separate classrooms. Of course, it was the dumbest idea imaginable. You couldn't hear anybody talking. So soon after, they put the walls back in. And another one is they threw out all the spellers because someone said, oh, no, whole language is the way to go. You don't need spellers. And then, within a year, people are trying to go, are all the spellers really gone? We need spellers back. So they just do dumb thing after dumb thing in schools because somebody at the top of the system, over coffee and reading the paper says, oh, we should do this. Well, that's what they've done in the area of indigenization, that they're saying in British Columbia, and I know in every other province, different ways, they're saying that Indigenous knowing, people who didn't have literacy or numeracy, didn't have the wheel and so forth, their way of knowing is now equivalent to modern Western or modern world science. And we're supposed to, in a classroom, because that's what we've been told from above, we're supposed to say that. So in the area that got me in trouble, again, that there are 215 dead children, murdered children in a mass grave, that I wasn't allowed to question that. And neither were my students, because that was an Indigenous knowing. That information, it was, an archaeologist found an old septic bed, but listened to some elders saying, no, it was dead children because Their people were treated so badly and now give us money. But what happened was an elder says anything, then all of a sudden that's considered to be tantamount to science. And so I think elders are probably full of all sorts of wisdom that I don't possess on lots of different things. So I am no way someone who's discount anybody's wisdom. But I think at the end of the day, we can't decide what is an historical fact unless it's being tested. In the same way in a court of law, you can't find someone guilty of murder unless the facts have been weighed by judge and jury. And that's what we're not allowed. Schools have got to this point right now where we can't judge the content that we are transmitting to students. So I would say, I've said it, school board has a lot of power, the provincial government has a lot of power, but I think even more so you have the Supreme Court, which are all activist judges now, and then you also have the Prime Minister. This is, you have a Prime Minister that believes in all this teenage, to me it's teenage level conspiratorial thinking, that the answer to all our problems is to just point a finger at certain parts of the society and say, these people are bad and all this sort of stuff, and give all the good jobs to us and everything is fine. That's what it really has come down to right now. It's just redistributing on the basis of race and gender and orientation and religion and so forth, the jobs in a society. That's Marxism. That's someone at the top saying, well, what we're going to do is socially engineer our society to make it better, when everyone knows it's making it a lot worse. And what I was saying early in the Soviet Union with the kulaks, when the more successful, wealthier farmers were slaughtered. And the number, people say as many as several million wealthy farmers lost their lives. So ordinary farmers would all be equal. So farmers would all have the equal amount of poverty. And so it's anyhow, communism was a failed experiment 100 years ago. And I don't know why we're recreating in our schools today.
Your answers are fantastic. But I guess I'll pick up on one thing. All these Marxist, progressive, socialists, I put them under the one umbrella of collectivists. So we have all these collectivists in our government, and I feel like they've been running unimpeded for so long, and they've gotten arrogant, and they've overstepped the boundary. And now there's a groundswell of Canadians they're ticked off. And I give the analogy of an octopus, like feeling its way around a bottle, trying to get in the ship in the bottle. So, Canadians are trying to find that cork and uncork the bottle and figure out how to reform their system. So the reason I asked, who was it that went after you? You mentioned your superiors. Was it the school board? Was it your principal? Like, who was it that they tried to find all of these, these ways that you disagreed with their views?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm still alone. Literally, everybody's against me. Most of my family's against me. So who's with me? I'm saying something historically accurate. I have the authority to do it because of the knowledge that I possess, the credentials that I have. To know that those who died tragically while enrolled in residential schools did so from disease. And in very few cases, accidents and fires or something else, but not murder. My union, because it's woke, because it believes in all this progressive authoritarianism. My regulatory body, because it just wants to punish any dissenter. It's like what Big Brother does in 1984 to people like Winston Smith. My employer, obviously, because it just wants all teachers to be in a little box and to think exactly as the employer says, to think on these issues, even though there couldn't be people more historically illiterate than my employer, which was the Abbotsford School District. They just don't know anything about history. And every communication I have with them, I go, oh, gosh, you really need to read a book, folks. So these people are and the government, provincial government, which is just always apologizing to anybody of certain minorities and always just saying the most atrocious things about people who, again, with my demographic. I think everybody was against me. Everybody's tried to punish me. Everyone's tried to take a piece of flesh from me. And my union right now is sticking with me. I don't know for how much longer. But payment is a world where they can kick me out of the school. They can take away my livelihood. Nobody's coming to me. The media didn't come to me. Nobody came to me. Now, yes, every once in a while there's some good people in the union. There's good people in my employer. There's good people in the government. Good people in media and so forth. Rebel News came to me and sort of lifted me out of my dungeon and said, no, we believe in you and we'll show it to you. But they didn't have, they don't have a big following. They do important work, but it's not a big following. I've been very much alone for 3 years. If I go into a school today and say there's only boys and girls, there's no such thing, there's not 82 genders or whatever your teachers are telling you, then I'd be walked out. And most of the people might agree with me, but they'd be going, oh, he should never have said that. Just fit in, folks. That's what it's all about. So I would say the fact that I haven't taught for 3 years for saying something that was historically accurate shows you how little defense I'm getting, little support I'm getting. Yeah, I have a following on Twittering, which is wonderful. Yeah, I'm getting interviews, and this is wonderful today, and I've written articles and so forth. So I'm not ungrateful toward those who have supported me. But most people in our society don't give a damn, and many of them, I think, are quite happy to see people like me who are independent thinkers squashed.
Jim, this is going to be the last question, and it's way out of left field. It's totally unrelated to anything we talked about. The Nazi in Parliament. Like, how did we get to this place in Canada? I mean, I came to this country in '89. I thought it was heaven. And then we let this guy that was an SS officer that hunted Jews during World War II, and they glorified. Like, how did that happen?
Well, we're allowing Palestinian supporters in Toronto and Montreal to chase Jewish people down the street to make them frightened to be sitting in a Jewish restaurant. So I don't just think that's a good example, but I think they're current examples of how tough it is to be a Jew in Canada today. And our government, they give lip service, but they don't do a damn thing to protect people. And so I'm very frightened. I think why a Nazi against everyone in Parliament standing up like seals, clapping and just in tandem for a Nazi who was probably responsible for the death of innocent civilians. They did it because groupthink. They're just not allowing people to question. And it's very dangerous for any society to be led by people like Justin Trudeau, who's now brought in an online harms bill where he's going to try and curtail critical thinking even more. I think the big problem, and this relates back to me as a school teacher, is we're telling kids, don't question authority. Don't question what you're told. Don't question what the teacher's telling you. Go along. And if you don't go along, then someone's going to call you a racist or misogynist or an anti-phobe or anti-Islamic phobic or whatever. They're going to call you names. Just receive the information and go forward. So the way to solve this is something that is in schools, but is being lost because of this new cult and this new religion, woke religion, and that is critical thinking. That you're allowing me to do it. You're listening to me. I'm listening to you. If we disagree with each other, we're very obviously we're on the same plane in our thinking, but both of this would jump on the other if we said something that we disagreed with. Because I think both our intention here is to try and get things right. If I said to you that it wasn't 215 kids that are found, or they did actually find graves in Kamloops, something like that, you would say, no, Jim, you would correct me if I were saying something to you, Payman, that you knew to be wrong. And so why are we taking away that right from school kids and also from politicians? Because the moment a politician stands up, then the politician gets crushed. And the best example is Lynn Bayek, who was forced out of the Senate in 2021 and twice before had to was suspended and had to take re-education. And what she said is something that most intelligent Canadians know today, and that is simply that residential schools had good intentions. That was what got her done. She said something positive. She talked about the positives of residential schools, and that, well, she wouldn't be booted out of the Senate if it were today. So in other words, our society is regaining its sanity. And it's people like you, Payman, that are making that possible. So thank you.
Well, I haven't done anything too profound yet,
No,
but
you're interviewing me, and that's helping because I'm telling it like it is as a school teacher, and not enough teachers are. In fact, I'm probably the only one.
yeah, there's only a handful of people like you out in Canada that are courageous, that are because the cost you guys pay is insanely
Yeah.
high.
I'm the only one that was doing it. Sorry, there's some amazing teachers out there criticizing. But I was the only one that did it while being employed as a teacher. And that's not a sign of intelligence. That shows I'm not the smartest guy because I got fired and the others waited until they were fired or they retired.
Well, at least you had the courage to stand up. Jim, we're at the end of the episode, and I was wondering if you had any words of optimism or specifically any suggestions for people in the community to enact change in anywhere at any level in the government, specifically higher education, but you take it away.
Yeah, there are lots of things, and I can just leave you with one again. Identify myself as I was a teacher, and I think that you parents and people that are listening to you, they do pay with their taxes for schools, and they shouldn't allow a Marxist ideology to capture institutions that all of us are investing heavily in. That the next time that someone walks in and comes across the pronouns and the pride flags and the overt grooming of children, telling children that the answer to their having a bad day is to change their body, they have to speak up. And they don't write a letter to a principal because the principal is the biggest part of the problem, or to the school board. Those are the people that are doing it. That's not enough. You need to go in and confront these people and you say, over my dead body is my kid not going to be able to critically assess what is being taught to him or her in school. And I said him and her on purpose because you can't even say him and her in school anymore. Everybody's they. People are just allowing even our own language to be bastardized. I don't understand it. Parents have to take the schools back. They just have to be aware of what their kids are being taught. They have to go into the school boards and the principal's office and say, no, I'm not here to listen to you. I'm here to tell you that what you're doing is wrong because you damn well know it. Wrong. Don't brainwash my child. Teach my child. Don't brainwash my child.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for coming on the show. And on behalf of all of Canada, I wanted to thank you for having the courage to stand up, sir.
Thank you very much, Payman.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, Jim.